And the theme that we're going to be looking at should by now, through our network, be becoming more and more familiar to you. In some ways, it's a very simple message. It's perhaps the heart of the message that we've been trying to share with you through the network this week. The thing is that as we look at the church in Europe, there is an urgent need for more leaders. But where are these leaders going to come from? Quality leaders emerge rather than just arriving. Training, courses, institutions have an important part to play in the development of a leader. But if that was the solution, well, we have no shortage of institutions, no shortage of courses. It clearly is not the total answer. Something else is needed, something that is relational. Can we learn something from the scriptures about a model of how to develop leaders, develop ministries? Can we begin to create a whole culture in our churches and in our movements which enable this to happen naturally? We're talking about discipleship in this session today, but sometimes when we speak of discipleship, it can come across in a way that is functional or organizational. About how many people. This month we spoke to 25 people, or this year we've met with 12 people, and we have these sort of techniques for how we're going to move things forward. But what do we find when we come to the pages of the scriptures? What we've been saying really through all of our sessions this week is what we find when we come to the scriptures is the language of family. And so please forgive me, what I'm going to share with you this morning feels incredibly basic, and yet it's incredibly and profoundly important. And if it is not something that is now kind of part of our instinct, part of our DNA, then I want to propose to you that this will be something to take back and to reflect on in your churches or organizations and movements. How can you better reflect the emphasis of the New Testament in your work? Look, at the very heart of what it means to be a Christian is that we have been brought into relationship with God through Christ. Relationship is at the heart. And that relationship then establishes us in relationship with one another in a united church. In Ephesians 2, verses 15 and 16, we hear about how the work of Christ takes a divided humanity and creates something which is new, something which is one. And in verse 19, Ephesians 2, verse 19, it describes the people of God as being a household. In the context of the time it was written, that is family language, the extended family in the household. Now, administration and organization might serve the family, but it doesn't define the family. Where does the definition from the family come? Well, it comes from God, ultimately. When Jesus taught his disciples how to approach God, he said to them this: "Our Father, who art in heaven." That phrase, "our Father," it's like this is the absolute basic of understanding what it is to relate to God. He's Father. It's family language. As Paul says, this is the Father from whom every family on the earth derives its name. In other words, its identity, its shape, its form. God has revealed himself as Father. When Jesus came, he came as the incarnate Son of God the Father. He revealed that the very nature of the Godhead is family. That might not be everything there is to say about God, but the starting point is, he's my Father. It's like, think of a child that's been born, and as they first begin to develop their language. Typically, their first word or the first couple of words could be something like dada or mama. And of course, there can be a little tension in the family relationship, depending on whether the baby says dada or mama. My eldest son, his first word was car, so I don't know what that tells you about our family. But anyway, do you see how the most basic cry that comes out from the heart of the newborn, the very first word that can be expressed is a family word, because the very definition of who this child is that they're in relationship to a mother and a father. It's just the same spiritually. However we go on to understand God, the Trinity, and so many words and names of God, the starting point for it all is Father. In Romans 8, verse 15, Paul describes the effect on the believer when the Holy Spirit regenerates you. You become born again. The Spirit brings you to life. What is the very first word that comes out from your mouth? It is Abba, Father. The Spirit, in a sense, creates from the beginning a family relationship. It starts, of course, in relationship to the Father, but soon the baby will begin to discover that they're part of a wider family as well. In Galatians 4, verse 6, Paul says something very similar. He talks about how the Spirit adopts us into relationship with the Father. We become sons of God. Adoption is our highest calling. We're set free from the law, and we now relate to God, not as judge, not as policeman, not as a lawgiver, not as a teacher ruling over you. We now come into a family relationship. Indeed, the scripture is so bold as to say that the law now becomes obsolete for defining a relationship with God because we've become sons. That is now our defining identity. The goal of justification is, and always was, adoption. Justification is not the goal, it is the glorious means, the incredibly costly means whereby God's will and purpose of adopting us as his sons is made possible. Here is a quote from Packer, J.I. Packer. He says, "What is the highest privilege of the gospel? What is a Christian? The question can be answered in many ways, but the richest answer I know is that a Christian is one who has God as Father. If you want to judge how well a person understands Christianity, find out how much he makes of the thought of being God's child and having God as his Father. If this is not the thought that prompts and controls his worship and prayers and his very outlook on life, it means that he does not understand Christianity very well at all. Adoption is the highest privilege that the gospel offers, higher even than justification. To be right with God, the judge, is a great thing, but to be loved and cared for by God the Father is greater." This is what it means, brothers and sisters, then, for us to be a Christian. We're part of God's family. It's the work of the Spirit to make this, then, a felt and known reality, true relationship, warm affection with God our Saviour. We can trace this theme through the Scriptures. I'm just going to rattle through a few verses. Genesis 17, verse 4, where the promise that's given to Abraham is going to be that there are going to be these sons. God's promise is that a family is going to be brought into being. God's purpose and plan is to bring about family. You turn to the book of Proverbs. What do you find? Proverbs 4:1. The author is speaking, "Listen to me, my son." There's this kind of family feel to the communication. Genesis 49 verses, running through that whole chapter, you could read the first few verses, and you see the instruction that's being given from a father, Jacob speaking to his sons. It's family language. There's a sort of intimate knowledge of what each son is like. Or perhaps when you read a psalm like Psalm 139, and you sort of see the care with which a child is watched over, even whilst growing in the mother's womb. It's like you can sense the tender, fatherly concern of God. This is not a distant God. This is not an authoritarian God. This is a God who has a father-like compassion and mercy and care. And so, friends, it's a crucial calling for each and every one of us here. The people of God need to know who they are. The people of God need to know who they are. Do your church members think of themselves as God's dearly loved children? Or do they think of themselves as sinners? Or do they think of themselves as members of the church in some way, or workers? What do they think of themselves as? If you have a leadership role, which I expect every one of us does here, whether it's a small group, maybe a church, a ministry, your great calling is to make sure that the people of God know who they are. And my proposition to you today is that first and foremost, they're God's children. They need to think of themselves as children in relationship to a perfect, loving Father. Friends, it's just what we find when we come into the New Testament as well. So, for example, Matthew 5, verse 45, it's the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus makes an appeal to them, be like your Father in heaven. Your sons, be like him. The appeal is made then to be like a son. Why? Because you are. He's not saying be like an orange. Well, how can I be like an orange? I'm not an orange. No, you're a son, so live in the revelation of what it means to be a son. Be like God. Sons who are well-fathered want to be, in some ways, like their father. They want to be like him. In other words, Jesus is saying, learn from the family metaphor, the very thing you grew up in. Every one of us knows what it is to be part of a family. Learn from that. Learn from the shortcomings. Learn from the beautiful things that you've seen. Allow that to shape the way that you are with the people of God. In 1 Corinthians 4, verse 15, Paul can say, you've got all these instructors, not many fathers. Of course, we have one Father in heaven, but the way that the older believers are to be with the younger believers is to be father-like. Paul says we've got a shortage of such things. We've got people who'll teach, and that's great, but his appeal is we're looking for something that's father-like, something that's mother-like. And then we have a collection of verses. If you think of the language that Paul uses when he speaks to Timothy, a co-worker, an authorized delegate, but you don't really find him being called a delegate. That's not the language that's used. The typical language, Timothy's got responsibility, he's got to appoint leaders, he's got jobs to do, teaching this and going there. He's got an incredible range of tasks to do, but when Paul speaks about him, it's like he's my dear son. I'm like a father to him. That's the language. So the task is flowing out of a kind of a family culture of the relationship. It's not about the task, it's about the relationship. And then the ministry flows out from that. Paul can call him my true child. Paul can say later on that if you don't care for your family, how can you be part of the church? How does that work? Because the very testing and training and development for Christian ministry is practiced in how you are with your own family. That's why when you're looking for elders, you're looking for how is this man with his family? How does he care for his children? How does he look after his household? Is he a taskmaster or is he a father? A bit like the Father in heaven. That's the kind of person you're looking for. The best speaker in the church? Not necessarily. The best organizer, the guy with the great strategy, great, but you're looking for someone who knows how to father a family. And it's fathers, it's mothers, Paul describes the mother of Rufus in Romans 16:13 as his mother, had been a mother to him. Who is your spiritual mother? If you're a woman, who are you spiritually mothering? Is there a shortage of spiritual mothers like there is of spiritual fathers? Maybe there is. It's family dynamics. I'm going to hand over to Tuuli, who's going to carry on now.
You are brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, daughters and sons. How does that work out in real life? That's what we're going to look at today. So, to lead with a family mindset is to have a two-eyed way of looking. You're looking at the Father above, and you're looking at the generation coming after you. This is how family mindset works in the church. It's important to remember we are no longer orphans. We are fathered by God. And only as we are reparented by our Father can we parent the next generation well. Orphans can't lead families. In so many ways, we have parts of our hearts and our lives where no matter how good our own parents were, we need the touch of our own Father to heal, to restore, to teach us what it is to be children and to then to be parents. Psalm 103 says, as a father has compassion on his children, that's how the Lord has compassion on us. Where we have areas that need healing, we have a Father who is willing to come in and heal. Next one, eyes on the next generation. As we heard in 2 Timothy, Paul says to him, what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others. Also, there's this idea of having a very big part of your own ministry is to be looking, where can I pass on and entrust what I have received? This is something Paul tells Timothy. This is what all of us should be looking to do. What have I received? What can I entrust? Paul led with a family mindset. He constantly had the goal of multiplication. You see, he rocked up and found Timothy and brought him in to the ministry and brought him along. You see him with John Mark, bringing John Mark on ministry with him. Paul was constantly looking, who can I bring into what I'm already doing? We need to have a similar aspect. You're already doing lots. You're already pretty busy. Just bring someone into what you're already doing. It doesn't have to be a really big task all the time to add into what you're already doing. Okay, hallmarks of healthy families. What does it look like to have a healthy family? These are great things to think about as we look at our own spiritual parenting. So in healthy families, parenting is a priority over paying the bills and preparing the meals and getting our kids along to school. Parenting is the priority. If we see all of the secondary things within our church, preparing sermons, doing Bible studies, organising the rotas, over, and more important, to our discipleship, we've lost the mindset of a healthy family. Is it the primary activity in your church? Or is it somewhere further down the line? Parents are available. Good parenting means you have parents there. Not just as many of us grew up with parents who were there physically, but emotionally absent, unavailable, unapproachable. Are we those kind of parents in our churches? Or are we available? Do we have time for those who are needing time with us? Or are we too important and too busy to be able to just sit down with those who are in our churches and in our small groups and in our homes? Parents are adaptive. You don't parent your children, each one the same way. They are not carbon copies of you, and they're not carbon copies of each other. Every child is different, and we need to think like that with our discipleship. You can't have a training course and call that discipleship, because it won't suit every single child at every time and stage of their life. Instead, think about areas. Which children need a bit more help in growing their character? Which children are struggling with practical skills like, preparing a sermon or praying or learning how to tithe? Which are the children that need support in just growing in their knowledge, just getting their grounding in Scripture on track? Think of it with your own children. Toddlers need very practical skills and a lot of boundaries, because otherwise they kill themselves. That is the nature of a toddler. They come into a room, they find the most dangerous thing, and that is exactly where they're headed and where they're going to spend their time. You have a lot of boundaries in place with toddlers because otherwise they don't grow to maturity. But as they grow, you loosen. You give them freedom because you know they're starting to embody the nature of faith and how to live faithfully. So you don't need to be quite so constrictive. You can release them into more and more freedom because they've grown in faithfulness. You can trust them with more. Think of it with seasons. There are things you're going to be leading your teenagers through, present for them emotionally, present for them in terms of just coming alongside, going through all the relational advice that they need. But then you'll have maybe an older son who's going off to university. He needs practical skills like how to launder his clothes and how to cook more than ramen in a kettle. That's what you need to think about with the children, with the younger people, with all of the people in your church, your brothers, sisters, sons and daughters. What do they need? You need to know them in order to know how to parent them. Then you can think in terms of time. Toddlers, you need to be around all the time, and whether you like it or not, they generally follow you from room to room anyway. Then you've got older kids, teenagers. You may see them once a day, usually after 12 p.m. in the middle of the day, right? That's when they finally emerge from their caves. And then you see them and you come alongside them when they're around. Then you might have older children who've left the home. You'll maybe see them once a week, once a month. You don't have to be present in the same way to every person because their needs are different. Know who you're serving, and then you'll know what they need. There may be some people that you meet on a Zoom once a year, and that is perfectly legitimate and good. That was similar to how Paul would have parented. He was around maybe 2 or 3 years. He'd go around and meet people. In the same way, we don't have to be constantly there putting in weekly meetings. They could be monthly or more infrequent. Good parenting values good character over good grades. Are we raising up our children with the mindset of, I need to be really perfect, I need to be really good, I need to be really skillful? Or are we raising up sons and daughters who can be entrusted, faithful men and women who we can entrust? We want their character to be such that that is what they are, seeking to grow in themselves, faithfulness, trustworthiness. We don't want to just pour out into just anyone either. We want to pour out into those children who come around us, who we know will value what we input. And finally, good parenting isn't satisfied with obedience. We're not raising robots. We're not raising copies of ourselves. Look at Jesus. The goal of discipleship was friendship. Do you realize? By the end of his ministry, he gathered his disciples and said, "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant doesn't know what his master is doing. I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." Are you looking at your sons and daughters as potential friends? Are you looking at them as people who can come shoulder to shoulder with you in the future and serve alongside you? Our priority is to help our sons and daughters cultivate faithfulness, and in our own priority is to cultivate relationship with them. Okay, what gets in the way of developing a family mindset? All right, let's have a look. How can we multiply? So first, you need to get used to mess. No family I know with children under 5 has a white sofa in their living room, because you know it will be covered in chocolate, cheese, and you will be finding moldy bits of bread down the back of it every week. We need to lower our standards in order to raise up children. We need to realize that if the goal is to have a perfect Sunday gathering, we cannot involve children. We cannot involve spiritual children. We need to realize that the first time someone leads worship might be a bit of a car crash. And that's an English way of saying it might go badly. But we need to cultivate a culture within our churches that celebrates effort, that celebrates faithfulness, that celebrates turning up and serving over being perfect and having a great ministry. Now, think of it as baking a cake. With a 2-year-old, what happens to the kitchen as you bake your cake with them? Flour is everywhere. Why? Because they come with 100% enthusiasm and 0% competence. They can't do anything right. At the end, you might get something you can eat, or you might not. But what is the goal, friends? The goal is that 20 years from now, you go to their house and they cook Christmas dinner for you. That is the goal, that you get to sit back and enjoy the fruits of your labor where you labored alongside them. This is what the mindset we have to have. Accept that mess and lowered standards are the only way in which we can raise children who one day can do great things and we can really celebrate. Okay, next, we need to get into the mindset of thinking of succession. Think of Jesus. He very easily could have just come, preached a few things, died, risen, ascended, and then that was great. He did what he needed to do. But no, his ministry was about raising up people who could carry on after him. The ascension of Jesus was not the end. He was here to see a body built. We have been adopted into that same mission of seeing something grow, of seeing something increase. And it could very much look like those who come after us surpassing us. Are we secure in our childlikeness before the Father, in our identity as sons, that we are willing to see people become better than us, potentially get bigger platforms and bigger stages than we could ever dream of? But the purpose is to be succeeded, is to be surpassed, is to see our name, Tuuli and daughters, or Joe and sons. We're looking at seeing sons raised up into what we're doing and possibly surpassing us. Next, we need to have a big picture thinking. I've touched on this a bit, but we are part of a calling by God to see a bride, a body raised up. I call it, my mission is to see the church glamorous and glorious, ever increasingly glamorous and glorious. That is what we're called into. We're also people who have, well, just think about it for a moment. You stand on the shoulders of men and women who went before you and put something into you from what they learnt. We didn't come here. None of us are here because somehow in our own beings we are able to generate and become who we are. We all can name people who put something in us, who fathered us to some degree, mothered us to some degree. We stand on the shoulders of previous generation. We need to think of ourselves as the shoulders of the next generation, to see the bride glamorous and glorious into eternity. Do we have an eternal mindset? Or do we see our role very local and very short term? Next, who are you? What's your identity? Are you a CEO? Are you a director? Are you a manager? I don't read any of those terms in the Bible, but what I do know is that each one of you is a brother and a sister, a mother and a father, a son and a daughter. Is that how you walk into a room? Is that how you approach a Sunday service? Do you come to a Sunday service like a business person? We've got an agenda, we have a format, we need to make sure we sing 2 songs, we need to make sure we read from the Old Testament and the New Testament, Anglican background here. We need to make sure that there is a time for prayers, and then we need to make sure that we finish by 9:45 and have some tea and coffee, maybe a couple chats, and then get everyone out the door by 12, because otherwise we'll be charged extra for hiring this house. It's a very business mindset. Is that how you approach Christmas in your family? You might have very loose guidelines. We'll eat around this time. We'll go watch that Christmas film at this time. We'll go for a walk now. But it's very reactive to who is there, who's in the room, and how they're feeling. Do we think of our gatherings as family gatherings, or do we see them as business meetings with agendas? And when you consider yourself a father or mother, you enter the room very differently. When maybe a year ago, I felt someone prayed for me and felt I'm entering a season of being a spiritual mother, and it's quite a big one for me because I'm single, I don't have my own kids, so there was a bit of a mindset change, and it happened that very Sunday. I came into the service, and based off of the sermon, there was quite a lot of kind of need for prayer and for people just gathering around once. And I remember there was one woman there who was not much younger than I was, but I really sensed, no, I'm a mother here. And so as she prayed and poured out her heart to God, I felt, I'm just going to stand over you and just physically be almost like a mother hen and cover you and try and cultivate a place of safety where you can pour out your heart without feeling exposed, without feeling judged. I'm going to be a mother to you, where once you've done your business with God, with the Father, you're able to stand up and feel, oh, I'm safe. I'm with someone who loves me. I'm with someone who cares for me. How do you see yourself in the way that you act in your gatherings? Father and mother, or just someone who's there to tick off a to-do list? Finally, relationship is the goal. Relationship is the goal. As we heard, Jesus said, I'm not calling you servants anymore, you're friends. That hasn't changed. In our discipleship, when we disciple others, the goal is relationship. Not to train up people who can be servants to our vision or our mission, who can lead a good Bible study or go out with us to witness. We're not looking for servants. We're looking to raise up friends. And when we read in Philippians 2:22, that, but you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. What a beautiful thing to raise up sons and daughters who can serve alongside us, be friends with us. I'm going to read out a quick quote that's just before this. And this is from Keith Intrater. I can't pronounce his name. So he talks about discipleship very differently to how traditionally we would approach it with a business mindset. He says, an act of discipling or discipline becomes an act of love when you have the goal of relationship. It's reaching out to draw the person closer into relationship. We correct a disciple's bad habit or weak area, not for correction's sake, not to make them perfect or obedient, but because it represents a stumbling block to our being able to draw closer to them in relationship. We're not pushing someone away through discipline, but we're extending ourselves in humility in the hopes of drawing closer to them. What a different mindset. What a different mindset. And isn't this the case in parenting? If in parenting you were disciplining your children in such a way that it pushed them away, the home is going to be a very, very cold place by the time they grow up and leave. You discipline your children to draw them into closer relationship. You say, when you do that, that affects my trust of you. Or when you say that, it hurts me and it creates distance. We need to change how you respond when you're angry or when you're frustrated so that relationship is fostered.